Hello and welcome to another edition of For the Record. I'm Sean Murphy. My guest today is John Torget. He is the Director of Ocean and Coastal Conservation for Rhode Island, and he's a returning guest to the show, but it's been a while, so welcome back. And where you been?
It's great to see you.
Thanks.
I've been around. I've been out on the water, working to clean up our bays and estuaries and rivers and coastal waters off of southern New England.
Well, you've been busy, so I will excuse you for that because you've been doing fantastic work, and we do have a lot to get to today. Let's talk about the Ocean and Coastal Conservation. What is it?
Well, Sean, the Nature Conservancy is the world's largest conservation organization. We have chapters in each of the 50 states and serving more than 35 countries around the globe. And we've been around maybe 60 years. And the organization, the Nature Conservancy, is best known perhaps for saving great places on land, iconic landscapes for biodiversity, for the creatures that live there, and preserving the ecological health and function of nature. And really in the last decade, the organization has built a powerful ocean and coastal conservation program that looks beyond land and into the water, rivers, estuaries, tidal waters, ocean and coastal waters, to extend the work that we're best known for, cleaning up and saving these great places on land, to enrich and restore and protect coastal waters. And that's what I do for the Nature Conservancy in Rhode Island, and I help to lead a regional team that extends from, we call it the Southern New England whole system, that extends from New York City and the west end of Long Island Sound all the way to the elbow of Cape Cod and out to sea.
You know, that's a good point because, I introduced you as Rhode Island. Most of the people watching today are in Rhode Island right now, but really, a waterway doesn't look at a border and go, oh, I'm at the border of the state here, I'll stop everything. And your work doesn't stop at the border either. How can it? You wouldn't be able to do your job if you had to do that.
Exactly, Sean. Nature does not respect political boundaries, and so we respect the politics, but not the boundaries.
Right.
We're all about busting silos. It wouldn't be enough to work to just clean up a bay or a salt pond or a river in Rhode Island if you're not getting at the sources of pollution and the sources of its richness and its diversity. So we really think on what we call a whole system level, the ecosystem, that includes the connection. And we really purposefully make explicit connections between the way we treat land and the way we manage land and the health of rivers and tidal waters and coastal waters of the ocean. Because the cleaner the land is and the more protected and intact nature is on land, that will be reflected in healthy and vibrant, diverse and usable water for everyone.
One thing that I remember that you had mentioned the last time you were here was your battle with saving nature. It doesn't have to be an adversarial situation with those or with that which is causing the pollution in the first place. Whether it's a factory or whether it's somebody developing land, it doesn't mean that you have to go out and attack. Just a sort of a positive conversation and a dialogue can help both sides understand what can be accomplished, right?
Thanks, Sean. I'm glad you remember something
right.
from our
That was
conversation
the one
a
thing.
couple of years ago. Well, the Nature Conservancy, by design, is non-confrontational and science-based, and we need to be, because really the way we get things done is by including people and building support and understanding for conservation, for restoration, for protection of nature. And it's rare, I come from a background of activism and advocacy. I worked for the Rhode Island-based environmental group Save the Bay for 18 years, where we were vocally and aggressively advocating for the cleanup of Narragansett Bay and its rivers, and I'm very proud of that. The Conservancy is a global organization. We have chapters serving all the 50 states, and it's important to us for people to recognize that environment is not a special interest. Nature is not a special interest. It's a common interest, and whether you're from a red state or a blue state, whether you're young or old, it's really about, conservation is about keeping places the way we want to see them, for nature and for people and for the future.
And we have to live here too. This is our planet, right?
Thank you. And I mean, that appeals to anyone. I tell a story, I had this conversation with our government relations director in Georgia, where I talk about I had a photo. It's my dad, and who's 82 now, and my son, who just turned 9, and a 23-pound striped bass that we caught right in downtown Providence. And I say,
Wow.
this picture tells a story that, when I was a little kid growing up in Providence, that river stank. It was polluted. Nobody fished there, and nobody would want to fish there. And
There might be something floating there that you're not interested
yeah,
in.
definitely that. And we still have a long way to go. But today, thanks to all of the people who made an investment in cleaning up that river, I can go out and spans these 3 generations and see this day that I never thought would be possible, that I never imagined could come true, where the river looks better, it smells better, we're catching striped bass. And my colleague from Georgia said, you know what, that same story works in Atlanta, because regardless of your politics, the generational connection, the family connection, and people's connection to nature is something that resonates with anyone, anywhere you go. And so it isn't really an adversarial political thing. It's about building people's understanding and passion and comfort with interacting with nature and keeping it as clean and healthy as we can get it to be.
When you improve something, when you repair something, when you clean up something like a river, even without doing any scientific tests, you can just look and see the return of species and the return of life. You know that improvement has been made there just by nature itself returning.
Yeah, well, there's the empirical side more than anecdotally, where you can look and say, there's a big striped bass in downtown Providence. We haven't seen that before.
Deal.
We got oysters on the pilings of the downtown Providence hurricane barrier. We're seeing the return of pollution-sensitive marine life, ospreys in the air, great blue herons. People are seeing these in the urban rivers. And so that's more than anecdotal. At the same time, Sean, we really need to do the science, because when we make big investments in infrastructure, in cleaning up a sewage treatment plant, in cleaning up a dirty power plant, people want to know, how's that affecting the ratepayers? What are we getting for our money for this cleanup? And we need to be able to say back to them, we invested in this and we're seeing dividends sooner and more dramatically than anyone ever expected. Bacteria levels down by more than half since 2008 in Narragansett Bay and the coastal waters. Nutrient pollution, similarly, down by more than half, down by more than 70% in some areas. Toxic pollution from industries, from factories, and from wastewater discharges, down by more than 95% in Rhode Island since we started keeping records on this. So we've got good data to base these observations on, and the observations tell a story, which is that we know that the water's cleaner and people are able to use and enjoy it safely and with peace of mind. That's very gratifying, and the job's not done.
Let's use that opportunity to take a break, because we have a lot more to get to. Why don't you give out the website real quick for people?
Yeah, come see us at nature.org. That's www.nature.org.
Very simple. All right. John Torgan, Director of Ocean and Coastal Conservation. We will take a short break and come right back. I'm Sean Murphy. This is For the Record. Stay there. Welcome back to For the Record. I'm Sean Murphy. My guest is John Torgan. He's the Director of Ocean and Coastal Conservation. We're talking about Rhode Island, but we're really talking about the whole general region, really, because it all connects. Before we went to the break, you had mentioned oysters and oyster beds and the importance of that, and I guess the return. Talk about that a little bit.
Well, oysters are important species to our coastal ecosystem in southern New England. They are delicious, of course, and they're part of the seafood industry.
At least we got food in on this the conversation today.
Well, and so not for nothing, as
Right.
we like to say in Rhode Island, but the real benefit of oysters and oyster reefs are the ecological benefits that they give to tidal waters. When oysters are allowed to grow and thrive in nature, the adult oysters, when they die, baby oysters grow on the shells. And as they grow up and die, they accrete these three-dimensional reef structures that are kind of like the temperate estuaries answer to coral reefs. And in all those nooks and crannies, first of all, the oysters filter water. An adult oyster can filter more than 50 gallons of water per day and clears out contaminants, takes out plankton, makes the water cleaner and clearer. The other really great benefit of these oyster reefs are that all those nooks and crannies make great habitat for native species of fish and other invertebrates, crabs and shrimp and other shellfish and everything that loves tidal waters. Now, oyster reefs as a habitat have declined by more than 90% globally and more than 95% in Rhode Island, referred to as being functionally extinct.
Is that something we're doing?
Well, it's poorly understood exactly why that's happened. Part of it is that we used to extract the oysters. We would tongue up the oysters, and then we would steam them, put the meats in cans or bottles or in soups and stews, and then we put the shell back down. These days, people harvest the oysters, and we're mostly growing them in racks and cages in oyster farms, and they go to the market live, and they go to the raw bar, or they get shucked, and people eat the raw oyster, and then the shell goes in the garbage, and it winds up in the landfill.
That sort of raising animals is not good, and it certainly isn't good for seafood either, I would imagine, in any sense, right?
In the case of oysters, oyster aquaculture is pretty good and safe environmentally if it's sited properly. The problem is that we're taking all the shell out of the system. We're putting it in the landfill where it really doesn't belong. Right. So the Nature Conservancy has a program called our Shell Recycling and Reef Building Program, where we work with local seafood restaurants and processors to get the shell. So we collect those shells and we pile them up. We let the sun and wind and rain get at them, and the flies get at them, and that takes off any extra cocktail sauce and meat, and what you get is an inert, nice, clean oyster shell. And then we go deploy those back into the tidal ponds and the coastal estuaries, and we create reef structures out of them. In some cases, we'll seed them with baby oysters from the hatchery. In other cases, we leave them alone.
Let nature take its course.
Let nature take its course, exactly, and we do scientific monitoring to see how that's done. Now, since we started the program, we've put more than 200 tons of oysters back into the system that otherwise would have wound up in landfills. And we have seen the return of lots of diverse marine life around these reefs that we've built. In fact, just in a few weeks, we're going to be doing another acre reef in Ninigret Pond, which is down near the Connecticut border in Charlestown, Rhode Island. And it's really cool stuff. We put it down there, and it's an oasis. Right away, fish and crabs and shrimp and birds and marine life are attracted to these places, and new oysters grow. Now, not always. Sometimes it's a lot like farming, where you have a good year and they grow, and another year they don't grow as well. The point is, though, that overall what we're doing is enriching and enhancing and restoring slimy, muddy bottom habitat into hard, structurally complex habitat that's great for native fish and other marine life.
Rome wasn't built in a day anyway, so it's a long-term thing anyway, right?
It's a long-term vision.
Yeah.
But it's a vision of, we call it recycling, in that, we'd like to get to the day where people are no longer throwing their shells away, that they don't belong in the garbage. If they're properly cured and treated, the ocean is a great place for shells.
You mentioned a few minutes ago the border of Connecticut. I want to stay in that neck of the woods because I want to talk dams, specifically one in Pawcatuck, which is actually in Connecticut. Another example of not knowing borders. Nature doesn't care about borders, and let's talk about a specific dam that's right there.
Yeah, there's some exciting news I can share with you, Sean, which is that after Hurricane Sandy, the Department of Interior, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, got money to remove the first dam in the lower Pawcatuck River, this first remaining dam that has no passage. It's called White Rock Dam. And with our partners, the Nature Conservancy in Rhode Island and Connecticut, under contract from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, has taken it out. And it's coming out right now as we speak. And it'll be the first time in hundreds of years that water has been able to flow freely past there. And that'll have great public benefits. Fish like river herring that have been stopped at the dam from coming back upriver to spawn will be able to go freely in both directions. And It will help with flood control. Because this was a dam that used to be used for for a mill purpose, but
So it's been obsolete for a
it's
while.
obsolete,
Yeah.
exactly. And there's no hydropower, there's no specific flood control use. And what we'll actually do is it'll improve the resilience of the lower river to storms and flooding and make it less, actually reduce risk and protect habitat as well as protect property and improve the ecological function of that river. So it's a beautiful thing.
I'm going to assume that the reason it wasn't removed before now was financial reasons,
Yeah.
maybe. Of course, it always comes down to money,
Well,
doesn't
it's
it?
expensive and
Yeah.
it's logistically complex because you got to know what's in the sediment. You don't want to take out a dam if the sediment is hot or contaminated upstream because you don't want to contribute
Right.
to pollution. And there are all sorts of factors you need to consider. That we agree that this is a holistic approach from state to state, but not surprisingly, perhaps state regs vary. Regulations in Rhode Island not exactly the same as in Connecticut. You got to get permission from the property owners. You got to go through permitting in both states,
A
and
lot of red tape.
these
huh?
things are challenging, and as well they should be. But that's one of the things I think the Nature Conservancy does well on behalf of the government. We can do these sorts of things more nimbly and more quickly and more efficiently because we're not subject to all the same limits and bureaucratic interference that sometimes our partners in the government are subject to. So they contract with the Conservancy. We subcontract out to the heavy machinery operators, and we project manage it for great outcomes, and we love to tell the story. So it's a privilege to be here with you today telling this story.
And they know you get things done, so
That's what it's about. We
The
get it
Narrow
done.
River acquisition.
Yeah.
And even other things besides that that you might be working on. But let's talk about the Narrow River first.
Thanks. Narrow River is a tidal river, an estuary really, that is located in Narragansett, Rhode Island. And near the mouth of the Narrow, people know it if they go to Narragansett Beach and you go all the way to the end past the Dunes Club on the north end, it's that river that meets the Atlantic Ocean right there. And it drains a watershed that extends up into North Kingston, Rhode Island, so it goes North Kingston, South Kingstown, Narragansett. And I think the Narrow River illustrates the Nature Conservancy's work in Rhode Island better than almost any other place because, first of all, we have worked in the watershed to protect land. More than 2,000 acres of land in this little Narrow River watershed is now protected and under conservation thanks to the work of the Nature Conservancy and our partners like the Narrow River Preservation Association, the Narrow River Land Trust, and other partners. And in the river itself, we've helped with fish passage, let herring come back up into the headwaters to spawn. And we're working now and talk a little bit about an innovative living shoreline project we've got going on in the river. And then all the way out to sea, we're working on marine conservation and research to protect fisheries in the ocean and to protect land and to allow for public access to those places. In the John H. Chafee National Wildlife Refuge, which is near the mouth of the Narrow River and managed by the Department of Interior, we've seen a lot of problem with losing coastal wetlands. The marsh that's there, the salt marsh that's there is eroding on its banks. The banks are becoming undercut from boat wakes, from sea level rise, higher high tides, big storms, big winter ice events, and we're losing that salt marsh. And that's a real concern because it's one of the best contiguous, good condition salt marshes left in Little Rhode Island. And so we've worked with our partners there in the state and the federal government to do something called Living Shoreline, where we are using nature-based strategies, coconut fiber logs and recycled oyster shells and salt marsh grasses that we're planting to reinforce the bank, that eroding bank, and build it up using these natural media to make it beautiful, resilient, and better habitat and to stem that loss and to stop that erosion in a way that we hope has replicability and demonstration power at a larger scale.
How much damage did Sandy do, Hurricane Sandy, after it happened? Because when you watch the news, you hear about all the property damage that was done, but they don't get into, we learned a lot from our friends over at Musquamacut Beach about what they did to rebuild the beach, which extends out a little bit further now. And also they were working on dredging a big pond over there. Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. You asked how bad the damage was from Sandy. Well, let's remember that in this part of the world, Sandy really brushed us. It wasn't a full-on hit, and considering that, the damage was extensive in places like Westerly and Mesquamacut and some places around the South Coast. We got hammered pretty hard, lost a lot of beach, had some significant property damage, a lot of power outage for people. But in the scheme of things, it wasn't nearly as bad as it could have been in this part of the world, not like it was in New Jersey and Long Island. Still, it taught a lot of people a lesson. Before Sandy, we were talking about why everyone should care about the threats of hurricanes and looking at nature-based shoreline protection and resilience. And it was hard. It was a hard sell because people think if I don't have a house on the beach or if I don't have a business right on the water, then this doesn't really affect me. After Sandy, everyone said, wow, we're all affected by this. When this happens, it affects our power, it affects our economy, it affects our whole way of life. And so it's been easier to get people to see what's in it for them to engage in this. And what we focused on is saying, let's not just go back and rebuild. Let's not, if a road gets washed out, if a house gets blown away, we shouldn't just rebuild it in the same way that it was before the storm. We've got to do this smarter.
Right. Ironically, the buildings like along Mesquamacut Beach came up to code when they had to rebuild.
Exactly.
And that were so outdated for so long.
Exactly. Now we can do it smarter, and you only have so many options. You really can't shovel against the tide. But this notion that we should build a giant seawall or metal wall to keep the ocean out, it isn't practical. It isn't realistic, and it wouldn't work. You can't shovel against the tide. What can you do? Well, you can do a few things. You can elevate houses and property. You can move them landward away from the coastal feature. And then what you can do, you really can't seawall and harden a lot of that shoreline. It's prohibited by regulation, but you can take soft media, basically giant sandbags. You can move rocks around to anchor those in place. You can do hybrid structural, non-structural things like geotextile bags and plant on top of those. And you can do vegetation plantings. Now, that's not going to last forever either, but it does buy you some time. It builds up the coastline in a way that respects nature, that allows the surf to be a normal surf zone for all the surfers out there. And it allows the birds and fish and the creatures that care about or that depend on healthy coastlines to thrive. It's beautiful, it's attractive, we don't lose the beaches, we don't lose the public access, and it affords some element of protection and reduced risk to property owners as well. Now, could another big storm come and wipe it out? Yes, it could, but when we do natural and nature-based installations to protect our shoreline, we're buying some time. And
another one's coming eventually.
Yeah, sure, of course.
It's a matter of how prepared you'll be next time.
And if it wipes it out, we can come back and rebuild. But when we use nature-based strategies, it's cheaper, it's low-tech, and it's functional, it's good for the environment, and it's beautiful. And so really that's what we're after is changing this mindset of rebuild stronger, bigger, harder. And rather than that, let's do it soft. Let's do it with the environment in mind and make it more naturally resilient using nature-based strategies and improving the environment as we go.
One more. We only have a couple of minutes left, so I got to get to a couple of things. Sometimes people, when they think of nature, the Nature Conservancy, they don't think of necessarily technology going along with it. But I bring to you wind turbines, which is sort of an alternative energy source, the future, and that's what's going to happen on Block Island.
Yeah, well, to your first point, innovation is important. One of the biggest problems facing coastal southern New England is nutrient pollution, and one of the things we're working on across this region is getting innovative wastewater treatment practices on site, which is often high tech, but not always. So that's one point. But to your question about wind turbines and wind farms, Rhode Island and Block Island Sound probably going to be the first commercial scale offshore wind installation in the country, and that's something that we pay close attention to. Block Island is an extraordinary and unique and fantastic
Love it.
place.
Go every summer.
And I spent a lot of my best times there growing up, and we have an office on Block Island. We have 5 staff who live out there, so we're really tuned into this. And we didn't take a position on this specific development proposal. What we did was to contribute to the process that figured out how to site it and where it was going to go. And not only did we work to make sure that if they decided to do it and where they decided to do it minimized environmental impacts, we worked to elevate ecological protection for the ocean in this process. Said, okay, you want to build wind turbines? Here's where they can't go. They can't go shallower than 60 feet, because if it's shallower than 60 feet, you're talking about diving duck habitat and other really important habitat for marine life. If you got to avoid structurally complex hard bottom. If you're out there in boulder fields, you're going to get into lobster spawning habitat, you're going to get into cod habitat and commercial fishing habitat. So we identify these areas, and we do it through a disciplined scientific mapping, geographic information system, GIS mapping of the whole ocean bottom in the region. We helped do this with the state of Rhode Island for more than 1,400 square miles. And as a result of that process, more than 700 square miles of the ocean now enjoys elevated ecological protection. And so, yes, there are going to be wind turbines, and we're watching that closely. And we've worked to condition the permits to do that in a way that is as gentle and respectful to the environment as possible. And so we're feeling good about what we've accomplished there, and we're watching this closely as everyone else, and we'll see how it works. I think we're going to, certainly the eyes of the world are on us.
We have to, I have so many more questions, but we are out of time, unfortunately, so we'll have to stop it there. Why don't you give out the website one more time for people?
Yeah. To learn more, go to nature.org. That's nature.org.
John Torgan, Director of Ocean and Coastal Conservation for the Nature Conservancy. Learned so much today. Thank you for being back, and don't be a stranger, okay?
Great. Thanks so much for having me.
All right. You can see this show and many others on our YouTube site. Until next time, I'm Sean Murphy. This is For the Record. Take care.